Greetings and welcome to another episode of Think Good Thoughts. Happy Friday. Yay, Friday. Today I wanted to talk about how to be able to influence people without challenging them and instead educating them. And I think this is a really important concept for those of us in the nonprofit world, whether we're dealing with donors or whether we're dealing with our staffs. And how to use the power of influence. And I'm certainly not the first person who's thought of this idea. Obviously, there have been lots of books written simple things like How to Win Friends and Influence People is an old goodie. Oh, hello, Joanne. How are you? We're super glad to have you joining us today. Anyway, so I've been thinking about this question of how we win people over in the nonprofit sector. And I feel that oftentimes our passion can get misinterpreted as not having a great ability to listen. And I wanted to share my own journey around listening and the use of good questions. So I have never been a person who liked lots of questions. As a kid, I didn't like a lot of questions. I grew up in a family with a lot of very smart people who always seemed to have the answers to all of the questions that I had. And I think that I just wanted to be able to have people believe what I'm saying and be influenced positively by my point of view. And I've really had to work on my ability to be open to handling questions and responding to them. When I was an intern at Muhlenberg College, I remember my year-long social work experience, and I remember the feedback that my supervisor gave me about being less defensive about getting feedback. And this is something that's always sticking in my head, although I'm not going to say I'm always great at it. But I've really started to think about this recently as I watch nonprofit leaders try to win their battles with donors, with boards, and with their staffs. So what's this all about? I have learned how to do this probably more of a function of being married to a trial attorney than anything else. So my husband asks a lot of questions, and my natural instinct is to get defensive and protective. And I think for many of us, when we're challenged, we look at challenge as a win-lose situation, and it really is. Because if you challenge assertively and aren't a good listener or educator, you really will lose your battle. Somebody will lose and somebody will win based on the strength of their argument and their point of view. I like to look at how we influence people differently, and I like to think about how we both challenge, support, and educate people in the context of all three of those things. So I spent a lot of years working in higher education and working with students. And in the higher education world and working with young people, we always talk about what can we do. Hey, Cal. We always talk about in the higher education community how we challenge and support students. So how can we give people an opportunity to grow, but make it safe enough for them to have diverse experiences? And so I learned this idea of challenge and support working with students, and we would do things with them all the time where they would come out of their comfort zone, but we would provide them with a safe place to fall. Now, as I think about this, there's another component to it, and it's about challenging, supporting, and educating people. And I've had a couple opportunities this week. Hey, George. Couple opportunities this week where I have really thought about the difference between taking something on head-on in a challenging way versus educating people. I wanted to give you a few examples of this as you work with organizations that you are involved with. Recently, one of the staffs that I work with was implementing a new software program. And it was new to everybody. We had no experience with this at all. And there was a lot of tension, as there always is when you move to a new program, whether it's a database program, client services, a CRM, whatever the program is. And what I found is that people were getting really aggravated with each other because instead of educating each other, they were challenging each other. They were feeling a lack of competency around what they were doing. And so what happened was there started to be a lot more fighting with each other and blaming each other for when things went wrong. When I asked them to shift their paradigm from blaming each other or challenging each other, which felt very aggressive to me, to educating each other, a lot of really good things started to happen. So as we started to educate ourselves, we started really listening to, how can we get great together at this program? Who's getting which parts of this program? Because ultimately, we really want to increase the quality of services that we're providing. Let's solve problems by educating each other instead of blaming each other. And that seemed to really resonate with these folks, and ended up changing the whole paradigm and the whole conversation, because we got out of a defensive mode and got into this new mode of education and learning. The other situation that I thought was really interesting around this topic was recently I was at a board meeting where an executive director was providing some outstanding information to their board about an issue that they felt really passionately about. And it had to do with their strategic plan and how to start building towards their strategic plan, and what components of that needed to be in place in the next 3 to 5 years. And this executive director is an extremely passionate person about this organization, and she had done her homework. She had done great research. She actually framed the issue in a very unique way, and really, I think, intellectually challenged people how to consider things like overhead support, meaning what we pay for our staffs, what we pay to keep the lights on, etc. What I realized in that conversation, though, was that many people that we work with and try to influence just don't have the same information that we do about a topic. So, for example, the question of something like overhead in nonprofits, and let's talk specifically about salaries. For years, nonprofits have operated in spending money on nothing. We have been running really, really tight with everything we do. But in the last few years, those of us that operate in the nonprofit space have learned about a lot of things, including something called the overhead myth. And Dan Pallotta has done remarkable work trying to educate everybody in the nonprofit sector and those who donate and who are philanthropic to the nonprofit sector about this myth of overhead. But I take for granted that everybody knows what the overhead myth is. And I think this executive director might have taken for granted that everybody knows and is aware of the overhead myth. What's kind of interesting is if you don't live in this crazy space of nonprofit leadership, you are not paying attention to the kinds of trends we're looking at. And so we have an old paradigm. We're trying to do the right thing for our staff. We're trying to educate people, but we're challenging them to think differently. And I think what we need to do is remember when we are trying to move our point of view forward and we're trying to use influence in what we do, that we really need to be mindful about educating people. So prior to a board meeting, for example, a board, an executive director might think, is this topic a topic that my board really is knowledgeable about, has done their research on, not just reading a board packet, but can I send them something in advance that will make them feel more educated as I challenge their point of view? So I love the idea of educating, challenging, and I also really think that we need to be much better at asking good questions when we're trying to glean support from other people. And there's a lot written on good questions. This one's a good one: change your questions, change your life. And right side up. Peter Drucker's work on the 5 most important questions. And I've been really focusing on this art of the question in the last year as I've done more leadership coaching. And I think, again, when we're trying to win people and gain influence, we need to be mindful of how we ask questions, when we ask questions, what kind of information we're looking for, and how we can use the information from these questions to further our point of view, and to do it in a way that doesn't challenge people to stop listening to what we have to say. And I think that's the trick. We want to keep people engaged in the conversation and not have them shut down in the conversation. So I challenge you today, I'm using the word challenge an awful lot, but I ask you today to kind of think of this concept of challenging, educating, and supporting people as you move your passionate work forward in your organizations. And with that said, I hope that everybody has an amazing weekend, and come back here next week for some more Think Good Thoughts. Thanks for those of you who are joining us live, and for everybody else, we'll be excited to have you watch this when you're sitting comfortably over the weekend. Happy weekend and think good.